Marathon's been out for about a week, and we've had a lot of discourse around Steam charts and people's feelings on the game, which have been pretty polarizing depending on what part of the game that you stand on. So I figured I would take my experience as someone that's worked in games for about 20 years and talk a little bit about some of the points that people have been sharing on social media and some of the things that you guys very much didn't like about my last video about the Marathon Server Slam. Before I get into like a lot of the details, I do want to address one big thing that you guys were accusing me of in that video, which was that I was a really bad shot. And in my defense, I was much bigger into FPS games when I was younger. I'm much older now. I am not as good as I used to be. And most of my time is painting maps in various strategy games. I am able to usually get the kills that I really need to get when it really matters.
Oh, no, no, no! No, I got shot! Guys, get me! Somebody get me! Get me! Get me! Get me! Get me up! 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 Okay, I'm dead. I'm dead. I'm dead.
The worst part of that whole footage is the fact that I made that kill playing as the French. Truly, truly dishonorable. But getting onto some of the more valid points or opinions that people are going to have that they throw around that I've been seeing. Let's talk a little bit about SteamDB in general. So people have been looking at SteamDB. You have some people that are really upset and saying, "Oh, well, I want this game to fail," like as like a FU to Bungie. You have some people that are saying that it is big unemployed maidenless behavior if it's something that you want to talk about. And at the end of the day, I think one of the most important things that you learn to look into when you're working in games is a lot of the metrics with those games, because those metrics on how your game performs is what people are going to look at when they decide if they're going to hire more people, pay out bonuses, or more common nowadays is determining layoffs. When we are looking at any kind of thing like SteamDB to get an idea of the player behavior, losing players over time, generally that's going to pretty much map almost one-to-one with the same kind of trends that you're going to see on other platforms. So if you're seeing a slow decay of users on PC, on Steam, you can assume there's a slow decay also on things like, PlayStation, Xbox, or your own launcher in the case of things like Overwatch, which is going to use, is it BattleNet? I don't know if they changed the name. But it's something that, as a developer, you should pay attention to. I've worked at a lot of companies where we were profitable, but we would have the metrics slide over time, and that decision would, because of that, it would drive decisions to have layoffs in the companies. Like it would be, oh, we're not growing enough, and like we're slightly losing it. So what are we going to do? We're going to have a round of layoffs, and we're going to outsource this much work, and then that makes things worse. And then the metrics go down, and then you have more layoffs and then more outsourcing. And eventually either the project gets shut down or it's basically completely run as a skeleton crew to just keep the game alive so that people can hopefully continue spending money on it to support that studio. With Marathon in particular, we can see pretty much immediately that it is not having any kind of growth. We are seeing a decline in players over time. And we've had people that are saying, oh, well, that's just for now. They're going to release more content. In particular, they're talking about this new in-game content with Marathon that's supposed to come out. And the thing with in-game content is you have to play the beginning of the game to get to the in-game content. So even if it is released, unless it is able to galvanize a huge amount of users and be so attractive that more people are going to get into the game, it really doesn't matter how good it is. Furthermore, in the industry, we're really good at copying each other. So let's say there's some really unique feature that's in this new in-game zone for Marathon. All that's going to happen is in 6 months from now, you're going to have ARC Raiders implement something similar to scratch that itch for people that might want to switch over to Marathon so that they can keep their player base and give something to the player base that they might want. Now, if we look at something like Battlefield 6 this week, for example, we had layoffs at the studio despite the fact that Battlefield 6 was like a super high-selling game in 2025. It didn't matter because the metrics slid over time, and it would have slid across the board in terms of console as well. That studio is encountering layoffs now. It is very important that we as an industry understand that this is how the decision makers, which are largely investor types, make these decisions. So when people are out there saying, well, no, you shouldn't look at these metrics, you shouldn't look at them, it doesn't logically make sense. You can have your feelings on where you want it to go, if you want it to go up or down one way or the other, but it is perfectly fine and reasonable for someone to look at these games and look at the metrics and say, is this something that particularly for free-to-play games, something that I want to play and invest money into. Because for these free-to-play games, yeah, there's a box price with Marathon, but they really expect you to, over time, spend money on battle passes and skins and everything that they possibly can get you to spend money on. And if you feel like this studio is going to be cut down to be a skeleton crew in the next quarter, maybe you don't want to spend that money. Maybe you're going to look at it and say, oh, at this rate, it's going to be significantly lower. Bungie's already had layoffs. They've got over 800 people there. Now, to put it into perspective, if you've got in a Western studio 100 people working there, it is going to cost about $1 million per month in headcount alone. They have over 800 people there. That's $8 million per month in just headcount. And with 2026, healthcare costs increased by like 20 to 30% for a lot of these places. So they're paying even more now this fiscal year because of healthcare price increases. And that is only going to go up over time. So it's perfectly reasonable for people to look at this and then make an analysis and say, hey, this is, what I want to look at. This is something that concerns me. Another thing, since this is Bungie, this is a really, really old studio. Bungie is what got me into buying my first Xbox. I played Halo and I was like, this is great. I got a copy of Halo 2 Collector's Edition. I got it signed by Marty O'Donnell. It's really great. Fantastic game. And a lot of people have a lot of strong feelings on Bungie because they want it to be a successful studio, and it is just not. If we look at Destiny 2, another live service game that they're really doing a poor job in maintaining. So this is a case where someone's going to look at Destiny 2, a live service game, and Marathon and say, okay, in time, Marathon is going to get the same kind of attention and love that Destiny 2 is getting, which is next to none. Now, another thing that people are talking about with all this isn't just the health of the game, but it's also a big question of Sony. Now, Sony purchased Bungie for $3.7 billion, which means they expect Bungie to make them over $3.7 billion in profit. So when you are looking at these games and they are way underperforming what they should have, because with Marathon, part of why they bought the studio was for Marathon. They were looking at this and thinking this was going to be a huge success. And this game needed Arc Raiders levels of numbers in terms of players for them to convert a number of those players into purchasing further things in the game. And it just hasn't materialized. And it's decaying pretty quickly. Now, Arc Raiders, when it first came out, you saw the numbers rise over time, at least for a little while. And that's just not happening with Marathon. And Paul Tassi even came out and said, look, the primary platform that people are playing this game on is on PC. So it's not like we can say, oh, there's this huge disconnect, because Destiny 2, yes, it has a much larger console player base than PC, but I'd be willing to bet that the trends that we're seeing on PC are going to be one-to-one with what we're seeing on console as well. One thing that a lot of people were pointed out in my last video was a lot of my objections to the UI, which is something that the company itself has admitted, yes, this is something that we're aware of. It has been dubbed font slop, which I think is pretty accurate. Maybe it's just that I'm in my old age, unable to look at these new fancy graphics and flashing images, and it's just something that I don't want to play. But it's not something that anyone should have any conversation about. It's been 5 years. There should be no objections, no big complaints to a lot of design elements of this game. And something so fundamental as the UI it's really important to not have that be an issue. You want your UI to be as clean as possible and easy to navigate for one major reason, because you want people to be able to find the store and spend money in the store. Unfortunately, that is one of the most important parts for all of these games, because the one thing that someone's going to ask in like a stakeholder meeting with board members or investors is they're going to say, show me the store. How are we going to get more people into the store? What's the click rate of getting into the store? How many times do they press the button to buy it? Can we add some dark patterns in there to get more money? And that is just the state of a lot of these AAA free-to-play games. Now, we have a lot of issues in AAA, especially AAA. We've got hyper-specialized people that don't look at the broad picture. We have a big issue with design by committee, where because everyone's making a decision, there's no one to blame. And we've got these companies that are getting ultra bloated. In this case, we're looking at over 800 people at Bungie, and they are barely able to maintain one game, and they have made a lackluster second game. For whenever you see the numbers of a studio, keep in mind, From Software, S-tier game company, they make S-tier games. That company has 450 people. So when you see a company where they're like, oh, we've got 5, 6, 10, 20,000 people working there, you need to keep in mind that It only takes 450 people to make an S tier game if you want to just use From Software as like your gold standard. So with all these places like Bungie, you should be able to have 2 S tier games that you are like building at the same time. They had layoffs when they had like 1,300. So it's very much like, it is very much possible for them to have the headcount to make this happen. The only reason this wouldn't be executed that well is usually points to a failure in leadership. If you have bad leaders, it doesn't matter how good your staff is. If you can't tell them what to do properly, you're not going to get a good product out of it. And that is the case across the board, not just in games, but in other businesses in general. If you have great employees, but your leaders are morons, it's going to be driven into the ground. At the end of the day, with all of these AAA places, or games in general, all you really have to do is provide a good game to the consumers that they're going to want to buy or spend their time in. Because the most important thing that a player can give you is their time. It takes time to spend money, it takes time to purchase the game. You need to spend time in the game to want to engage with a free-to-play game, model. And in this case, looking at all these metrics, it's just not particularly there. Like, we can look at this. We got the confirmation from Paul Tassi. We're looking at a competitor in the market with Arc Raiders, and we're saying this looks bad. A big driver for this that we keep seeing is like toxic positivity, where you have a lot of people around that are designed by committee, so no one wants to say anything bad about anything, so you end up having a lot of lackluster elements. And a really unfortunate thing about Marathon is we've had some videos out of Marathon that look really phenomenal, where it's trying to tease the story. Like that opening cutscene to Marathon was actually really interesting. If Marathon had had a single-player campaign, I would have bought the game. I would have been like, I'm not a big fan of the UI, I'm not a big fan of the characters, but the story's there enough where I would be interested enough to say, look, $40, I get like 10, maybe 20 hours of gameplay out of it. That would be fantastic. And if it's a really great story, great. And if it's not, then I can make a video talking about how bad the story is. Instead, all they have is a few maps, good gunplay, mediocre UI, and a game that is just not resonating with a lot of people. And that's the core issue. If your game's not resonating with people, everything else falls apart. I really believe that the next big thing in games isn't these big studios like Bungie, where they are consistently producing mediocrity, but with indie. Like, we had Slay the Spire come out this past weekend, and it really took off. You saw, even in like the night hours for the US, it really picked up in Asia. Huge win. That didn't happen with Marathon. People played it in the West, and when it hit the East, no one was interested. Numbers dropped off significantly. Mugenics is another game that came out more recently, also did phenomenal numbers. These are all very small teams that are making these games. And these small teams are laser focused on getting a good idea out to market. They're making a ton of money. Meanwhile, you're going to have these AAA investors that are looking at these places that they're like, oh, I'm paying like, 100 million plus a year on headcount alone, not to include all the marketing costs, not to include the cost of these massively expensive office buildings. And you're going to say, why are we paying for that when these teams of like 2, 3, maybe a dozen, 20 people are just knocking it out of the park? What are we doing? Well, as an industry, we've totally lost our way with this thing where we've got, where our response has been to just throw headcount at issues, like some soulless corporation tech company. Because a lot of tech companies, their solution to everything is just, throw more headcount at it, investors will like it. And part of it's the investors that are making that happen. But if you're going to be at one of these companies and you're going to be a leader and someone that really sets the creative vision, which is what you need for a lot of these places, you need to have someone with a strong creative vision to make that happen. No one's opening up like a Hideo Kojima game and you're like, I wonder, what flavor of the game we're getting because, what kind of people did they hire over time? You're going to get a weird game because it's Hideo Kojima. The same can't be said for most Western games, where you can have studios that had really fantastic games in the past. Then they hire en masse, designed by committee, and you have this really lukewarm, uninteresting story that in many cases ruins the IPs that they are built off of. But if I'm going to wrap this whole thing up, I would just want to say it's perfectly fine for people to be going over things like SteamDB, to use it as an entry point to kind of, math off of. If you're going to pop open SteamDB and like dance on the grave of a game, you can do that. It's fine. Like, for these game developers to get really up in their feelings when people do and say these things, look, people are toxic online. Like, I've worked with people that are like, look, we made a balance change in a game and I got a torrent of death threats because my name got leaked on some Discord somewhere, because there's some wild people out there. You just got to ignore it. And if you can't ignore it, then you need to delete your social media. That's all that it comes down to. You need to understand that there's a lot of passionate people that play games that are very passionate about, brands, very certain IPs. And you need to deal with that, whether it's positive or negative. And if you can't handle that, don't engage. Like, if you want to work in this industry and be in here long term, you're going to have to deal with this. And if you can't deal with it, you're going to be deeply unhappy. And for a lot of you folks from AAA that are working at these studios that aren't producing good games, once these places explode, for these companies going under and getting laid off, like, we're in a worse job market than when I entered, which was back in 2008. Good luck getting another job. Chances are your next position is going to be very different from what you're working in now. And that is just how it's going to have to be, because we need to go back to a space in the games industry where we have people that know what they're doing, calling the shots. We need to have people that are taking responsibility and actually building games that people want to play, instead of this democracy nonsense. We need autocracy, full authoritarian people that are running these companies that are there to make a good game, instead of whatever this milquetoast stuff is that is built in a boardroom. But that is all I got for today. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see you again in a future video. Farewell.